India's relationship with her neighbors has always been on a seesaw, ranging from the bad to the indifferent. Bangladesh erupted recently with violence against the minorities, Hindus. Counter violence broke out in Tripura, here, where the minorities, Muslims, were targeted. Diplomatically, however, both countries kept their cool. But relations are not great, and definitely not on an even keel. Nepal too has a shaky relationship with India, which the small country often sees as arrogant and dictatorial. And then there is the big elephant in the South Asian room, China. Its footprint is expanding across South Asia. The answer for India lies in good diplomacy, peace, and friendship, and reaching out to the insecure, smaller neighbors with a warm handshake of trust and confidence. Welcome to Off Limits, everyone. Our guest this week is Ambassador Deb Mukharji, who was earlier the High Commissioner to Bangladesh, Nepal, and Nigeria as well. He's an author, he is a commentator, and he's one of the few diplomats that I know who has very, very in-depth knowledge of the countries he has worked in. And we are really delighted to have you with us, Ambassador. And let me ask immediately, go straight to the issue that has been concerning everyone, and it's still not completely resolved, which is the violence in Bangladesh against the minorities, which there, of course, are the Hindus. And this is something I remember as a journalist, we've always covered. There have been these sporadic and also targeted incidents, but usually not under the Awami League, or am I wrong in saying that?
May have been similar instances even with the Awami League government.
Okay.
But I think what you have in mind, the recent one in Chittagong and Kumilla, which was fairly widespread during Durga Puja, this had a slightly different connotation. This is not the kind of anti-Hindu pogroms that have happened in the past, but as you said, not under an Awami League dispensation, but I think 2001 after the elections was absolutely horrific. But anyway,
Yes.
Now this one, by all appearances, so far as I can see, was targeting the Awami League.
Okay.
You see, somebody placed a copy of the Holy Quran on the lap of Hanuman, who was keeping guard of a Durga Mandap. Now that was photographed by someone who then spread the word that, the Quran is being desecrated.
Right.
And then there were simultaneous attacks on the puja mandaps in several parts of Bangladesh. Now, within a few days, 3-4 days or less, again, thanks to the CCTV cameras, which are so widely available now, they located the gentleman who had placed the Quran on the lap of Hanuman.
Right.
And clearly, it was and the person who spread the word was in cahoots with him.
Mm.
So it was clearly an act of mischief with obvious implications for the minorities, for the Awami League, for Bangladesh's relations with India, and so on. So I see it as slightly different from what has happened in the past, which has been, let's say, what used to happen mostly in Chittagong before the elections, threats against minorities or riots against minorities, so they don't participate in the elections. This was slightly different. Here, I think that the target was the government.
All right. So that says a lot for the government also.
And one thing to it, Seema, I think very fortunately and wisely, the government of India did not react to it, as the perpetrators would have expected, thereby, giving it further spins and so on.
Right. But then there was a reaction in Tripura, right? So there was a sort of
Oh,
a...
absolutely, absolutely. You see, what happened in Tripura within days was that there was fairly widespread attacks on mosques, basically desecration of mosques. But the one distinction you can draw between the two series of events, that in Bangladesh, the Bangladesh Prime Minister went to the premier Hindu temple in Dhaka, the Dhakeshwari temple, and gave a very powerful speech addressed at the Hindus, saying that you are citizens of the country, that no one tell you otherwise. And you do all that we can to protect you and your interests. And in fact, certainly there was a slippage in the establishment because that such a network of attacks could have happened simultaneously would have taken preparation. And there were also very strong criticism of the government of Bangladesh by the civil society of Bangladesh, saying that you are not doing your job. How come this was allowed to happen? So you have to pull up your intelligence agencies. So there was, in that sense, a very positive reaction, both from the Prime Minister herself and the civil society, in response to these vandalism and attacks. In Tripura, on the other hand, I mean, when journalists try to look into it, as you know, they were slapped with vast numbers of Unlawful Activities Prevention Act because of trying to incite communal violence. Now, this, frankly, I find a little odd because they were only trying to find out
what was happening. Yes.
What was happening.
I mean, they were doing their job.
They were doing their job, but obviously the government of Tripura has a problem with that.
So there is, it's unfortunate that the Bangladeshi response was more democratic, right?
Was the establishment was very clear, very firm. They picked up the prime movers of this particular conspiracy, the man who placed the Quran on the
Yes,
Namaz
absolutely.
mat,
And they took action.
Circulated it.
Yeah.
And now investigations will show how this was spread, and because as I repeat it again, I have no doubt that the object of this exercise was not so much the minorities as giving a bad
As the
name
government
to the minorities, create a rift between them and the minorities, and of course create a rift between the governments of Bangladesh and India.
Right.
That would have been the objective of this particular rather malicious exercise.
Yes. But over these years, because the Awami League now seems to be the only party in power, the opposition is over and almost done with. So would you say that Sheikh Hasina is more of a dictator than she's ever been before? I mean, earlier, of course, we had the two women continuously at each other. But does this work better for Bangladesh at all?
I mean, ideally, one would like there to be an effective opposition, but I see no signs of that. You see, I mean, I'm perfectly aware of the charges that are framed against Sheikh Hasina for being very autocratic, being a dictator, and so on. But the ground reality is that there is no opposition. And if I may speak frankly, the only party which can be in opposition is the BNP, the Bangladesh Nationalist Party. But as far as I can see from a distance, they seem to be following the dictates coming from Mr. Tariq Rahman in London. And those are neither democratic nor helpful.
Absolutely.
So unless the BNP, I mean, look, I have known many fine people in the BNP in my time. They have been freedom fighters. They have been nationalists. So I have no problem with individuals in the BNP. But there is a certain problem with regard to the attitude of the central leadership, which you find in their attitude towards the liberation war, towards Pakistan, and of course towards India. So
Right.
these are internal problems for the BNP to solve.
And how do you see
Because
the relations now between New Delhi and Awami League? Do you feel it is stronger, or do you feel that there are more fissures that have crept into these bilateral ties?
Seema, dekhiye, if you look at the last 10 years or so, particularly since the Awami League came back in 2009 or 10, they have delivered on India's prime concern, and that is terrorism, sanctuary to our insurgents, and basically causing problems in India, as the previous government was very happily, very openly doing now. I don't want to spend our short time in discussing that. This is public knowledge, documented knowledge. Now, so the Awami League has delivered on our primary concerns with regard to our Northeast. Unfortunately, politically, we have failed to deliver on Bangladesh's concern regarding river waters. The Tista is what I have in mind, where
Yes, of
it
course.
almost happened when Manmohan Singh went to Dhaka in 2011. And then, of course,
But it almost happened. It stopped. It didn't, he couldn't completely complete.
everything was ready for the signature. And then, because Mamata Banerjee said no, it didn't happen. The other point of difference, which can become more complicated in the days to come, is of course, the treatment of Muslims in India. And in fact, Sheikh Hasina, in a speech following the incidents in Kumilla and Chittagong, she cautioned India about not doing things which can affect the welfare of Hindu minority in Bangladesh. She said it openly, which, as you know, I have been writing about
Yes.
also. Now, this, and separately she has said that, the subcontinent is so configurated that something that negative that happens in one area is very likely to have a negative repercussion in another. Now, again, I don't want to take too much of your time, but basically the way we have been dealing with this illegal migration issue, the way we are happily going around saying that the Bangladeshis are termites, and so on. And in fact, the foreign minister of Bangladesh said some days or weeks ago, please don't forget that we are a democracy and we have to take heed of the reactions of people. So how would the people react when the Indians at the highest levels express these views about Bangladesh? And the reaction to this you saw was shocking reaction, absolutely, to Prime Minister Modi's visit to Bangladesh on the occasion of to celebrate the 50 years of the Freedom War, when several people were killed, had to be killed by the police in violent protests.
Absolutely.
In Bangladesh against the visit of our Prime Minister.
Yes.
And it was not just the Jamaat or the usual suspects.
The Awami League.
Protests included, it was an across the board feeling of resentment against what, two things. They were Muslims were seen to be treated in India, and B, the comments about Bangladesh.
Right. Right. So this is obviously a continuing trajectory, so we have to watch it.
Yes,
But
this has to be watched.
Yes.
This has to be watched. So far, I see at least Sheikh Hasina playing this very wisely, very coolly. But, as we saw in that spark during Mr. Modi's visit, there are resentments building up. And frankly, I have friends from Bangladesh telling me that this is not a good scene. But
let's see. So I'm before we come towards the end on the elephant in the South Asian room, which is China, a little bit on Nepal. Now, relations between India and Nepal, we've seen again a very up and down kind of thing. In fact, we have this up and down with all our neighbors, unfortunately. The relations were not as good or had gone down or degenerated quite a bit, but they seem to be improving a bit now because Nepal is acting according to Indian advice on recently not allowing people to take the rail link and cross into India. Third party shouldn't come via Nepal into India is a request that the Indian government made, and they've agreed to it. So are you seeing something different, or are we still on the edge?
Yeah, well, yes, I wish Indo-Nepal relations could have been better. I have great fondness for the people of Nepal. But, there are problems on both sides. I mean, I can't blame only the Indians or the Nepalese. But there has been, the relationship, in a sense, has not been what I would say on sound principles of footing. Now, you used the word just now, Indian advice, and my hackles rose because, Seema, that's something that we must not do. We must not advise the Nepalese. Of course, you corrected yourself. You said Indian request.
That's why I use the term deliberately.
Yeah, so to provoke me. So,
Yeah.
do
it all the time, unfortunately.
The problem is, look, I've written a book on the Indo-Nepal relations. Way back in the 50s, when the eminent person Rishikesh Shah, who was foreign minister, asked Jawaharlal Nehru for advice. Nehru's response was, "Sir, we are willing to give it any time." I'm talking of late 50s, mind you. But the problem is, whenever we give advice, you turn around and see that we are interfering. So there are these mental issues, and to put it briefly, I think we have been less than sensitive with regard to the Nepalese and their aspirations. And the Nepalese have problems in dealing with us. They have tried out China, but I think they will also discover that, beyond a point, how much can you rely on China for all the things that you may wish to do?
Before I want you to spell that out a little more, in a bit. But even under all governments, while I've seen other governments in India sort of play around with countries like sometimes with Pakistan or Bangladesh, or try to improve relations with Bangladesh, with Nepal, even under Manmohan Singh, it was always the Foreign Office bullying, telling the Nepalese what to do, how to do it. Our foreign secretaries, I don't want to name a couple of them, who went in there and would throw their little weight around. So the Nepal's always felt probably the worst of Indian hegemony in a way, right?
I won't go into details here, Seema. I mean, I
Yeah.
agree partially with you. But I think it is a question of how you offer your advice. Uh, and I think this is where I think we may have slipped over the years. But let me also say, please, the point is not very easy to deal with for an Indian yeah, because on the one hand, we sort of, without saying so, what we say is, the brother Hindu country, we are the same people. And the more you say that, the more worried they get. You understand that? This was pointed out 60 years ago. And don't keep on talking of your similarities and commonalities because they're afraid of being swallowed up by Big Brother. So we need to be careful, we need to be sensitive in dealing with Nepal. But again, I'm afraid also much too often we give in to pressures when we should not. So if we were to be able, both of us, to deal with the other as sovereign countries to start with, and then say that you have your interests, I have my interests. So let us see how the two can meld. But I would never uh, presume to advise Nepal on what to do. They can do what they want, and if there are consequences, that's their problem, not my problem.
Right. So when, it's a sort of a strange kind of an attitude which we have developed, and it's not just happened overnight or in the last 7 years. Maybe it's worse now. There have been periods when it was better towards the South Asian neighbors because they're smaller and we've been pushing them around here and there. Somehow the influence of China seems to be growing, or at least maybe we are becoming also more aware of it. But China, Dhaka, China, Kathmandu, China, Pakistan, of course, was always there, but China, Sri Lanka. So is it expanding its footprint in the region simply because India is not being able to keep diplomatic relations on an even keel and improve them?
Uh, this can merit a very long discussion on its own. I will try to be brief. Sima, I think China is doing what China has to do
Okay.
in its own self-interest. So, I mean, I do not question their right to try and do and expand their influence as much as they can. My question is, what are we doing about it? You mentioned Sri Lanka. As far as I know, Hambantota was for India's taking. We did not. So if the Chinese move in, the Chinese move in. You can't blame the Sri Lankans or the Chinese for that. In Nepal, frankly, as I said, I think both sides are a little somewhat too responsible for relations not being as warm as they can be. I think what Nepal did recently with regard to Kala Pane area was really completely avoidable in my view. I've been over that area several times. Now, if you come to Bangladesh, I don't see any great Chinese increase in Chinese influence or hold over Bangladesh. I think whatever they are doing, whatever Bangladesh assistance Bangladesh is accepting, they see it as in their own national interest. And I think they are a proud people. And I don't remember the exact instance, but within the past year, the Chinese ambassador made a remark which was, it was not right for an ambassador of any country to make about another. And there was an instant, very strong rejoinder from the Foreign Office. So I don't think the Chinese, I mean, unlike in Nepal, where their ambassador has been, getting away with whatever she has been doing, except in the last few months and so on. Now, in Bangladesh, I think they look very closely at how the Chinese are behaving, and they will do what they do in their own national interest. But again, I come back to, and again, the point you made about all past governments in India. And it is a fact that Mr. Modi was the first Indian Prime Minister to visit Nepal in God knows how many years. Now, that's very shocking. So it's up to us to see where we have gone wrong. And I go back to what I said earlier. I think to start with, we as a people, as you know, are very arrogant and difficult when it comes to non-whites. I'm putting it
True.
very plainly on the table.
True.
I mean, I've served in Africa, so I know.
Yes.
And I've served a lot in South Asia. Now, so I think a little bit of humility, maybe at times, in how you deal with your neighbors, and don't presume to know what is good for them. It is their business to know what is in their own national interest. But if they tread on your toes, that is when you have to react. That's fair enough.
Right. Well, it's sometimes seems very strange that in the region there were periods where the neighbors all wanted and they were fairly attuned to India taking the lead in South Asia and bringing in South Asian peace and stability and, bringing out a program which everybody could follow through SARC. But somehow it just never worked out. And while other cluster of countries have all built certain kind of mutual cooperation, we in South Asia are just so dragging ourselves down. So,
Well,
yeah.
May I just put in a word here? SARC was not our idea. Okay, SARC was the idea of late President Ziaur Rahman of Bangladesh. I happened to be in the ministry at the time, and I know there was a lot of opposition to it in India to the idea of SARC.
Nice.
That's another long story.
Yeah, that's
but
interesting.
Be it as it may, the fact that SARC hasn't taken off, I think we honestly tried. But it just got linked with India-Pakistan. So that at any SARC meeting, nobody looked at what was good for SARC, good for the individual countries, what their concerns were. Well, how is the Indian Prime Minister and the Pakistani Prime Minister are scowling at each other, are smiling at each other?
Well, they can.
The whole thing was pathetic, absolutely.
Yeah.
So now, it was not entirely our fault. It was, again, the media, but we fell a victim to that. So SARC fell a victim to that. So I think India has contributed to SARC. I think India was willing to contribute more, but it got caught in the Indo-Pakistan binary, where unfortunately things were not going to happen.
Right. So one last question, I won't keep you too long, but are you sort of optimistic? I mean, as we stand today, I know optimism is part of human beings, but are you optimistic that relations will improve around, or let's just say between Nepal and Bangladesh, because those are the two countries we've discussed in this program, and India? Do you think we are heading the right way now?
Well, I think Sri Lanka, Maldives, Myanmar is a difficult call because what the generals are doing there is unacceptable and it cannot be there permanently. But we are keeping a low profile for understandable reasons on that. No, I think with the exception of Pakistan, which is a different category by itself, all kinds of historical and other reasons, I can see all the other relations improving.
Right.
But again, at the political level, primarily at the political level, and also in the civil service and so on, we have to have a little humility towards others and a little concern for their interests. Because at the moment, the real catchword in India, Seema, I'm afraid, is arrogance. And I don't think that is going to help. It will not help internally in India, in management of our internal affairs, and it certainly will not contribute to better relations in the neighborhood or elsewhere.
Right. Thank you so much, Ambassador Mukherjee. This was so interesting. Thank you. And we see you again.
Thank you.
That was an interesting discussion with Ambassador Mukherjee. And he has actually pinpointed two reasons because of which India's relationship with the cluster of neighbors has always been a little jeopardized. There have been periods where we've been talking and we've been fairly close, and we've actually even driven SARC, the South Asian Cooperation, to a certain level. And there are periods, and increasing periods, where we do not seem to be getting along with our neighbors. And those 2 points that he's actually underlined is our own treatment of our people, particularly the minorities, which we saw play out in Bangladesh recently, and our own arrogance in dealing with the smaller countries. So hopefully we will be mending this, and we will be moving towards better relations out of the realization that stability depends on peace and good relations with those around us in the region. Thank you so much.